David, in terms of PASA's role in digital administration, where do you think PASA can really add value in the industry?
So I think it has a number of roles. Partly it's to educate trustees. I think a number of trustees have looked at administration, and typically when they go out to tender, they look for a new administrator. Clearly quality of service is important, but actually quite often it's cost that actually drives the decision making. So I think trustees need to change their mindset around administration. If you expend the least amount of money, then you don't allow administrators to invest in the service, to embrace technology, enhance the service for the benefit of members. So I think trustees have got to really understand what they're buying, and it may not be that the cheapest service that's available is the right one. And I think that's particularly true as we get into the pensions dashboard and the importance of getting accurate information out to members. There is this point around enhancing the service to members by having online retirement as well as online information around how much benefit people have accrued. So member service, I think, can be digitised and improved with the right level of investment. And ultimately, I think if you digitise, you potentially create economies of scale, which mean that actually it's not necessarily a huge amount more money to do that. So the first thing is to make trustees aware of the value of the administration services that are there. There is a role for PASA to, I think, highlight what is really good experience in the industry and make people available, make the information available as to what can be done if you do invest in technology. So even amongst administrators, I think there are varying levels of capability around how people are using technology, how they're using AI. So making people aware of what's available and spreading good practice and encouraging that investment. But we do need, you said right at the start, there is a skills shortage. We do need to encourage people into administration. We need to show them that it's an exciting career. It can be at the forefront of technology. So PASA's got a role of attracting people industry and making sure there's a pipeline of talent. And PASA has a role with the regulator. We interface with the regulator. We understand what their concerns are. And it's to help our members deal with the regulator in an effective way and show the pensions regulator that we're raising the standards of administration, we're embracing technology. And we can be relied on to get the message out about what they expect and help our members to achieve the standards that the regulator wants.
I think the key thing there as well is making sure that there is some common standards. I mean, if we look at why PASA was born, it was to create standards where standards don't exist. And that's, I think, with digital administration, it's creating that next generation of standards that actually say this is what good and this is what excellent looks like in these digital age. And we were only discussing the other day that very much the role of an administrator and the roles of administration has changed phenomenally even since the pandemic. But it has evolved, and so the expectations on administration staff, administration departments and TPAs is quite different to what it once was.
Yeah. And David, do you think PASA has a role to play there in terms of helping schemes along that journey?
If you take a step back, the landscape is changing quite remarkably. So if you go back to 2012, there were 3,700 occupational DC schemes with more than 12 members. When I joined the regulator in 2018, we were down to just over 1,400. When I left the regulator 5 years later, it was below 1,200. Last year it was below 1,000, and the regulator's saying we'll probably have less than 500 schemes by 2030. On top of that, you've then got the Mansion House agenda announcements where the government is saying the 30 multi-employer master trusts it wants to reduce down. It wants down to a critical value of 25 billion. It wants potentially to move group personal pensions either into consolidated group personal pensions or into the master trust arena. So you've got enormous change in the DC market, enormous consolidation.
Yeah.
So there is that actually is it worth investing in the technology, or is it worth merging into a bigger fund and then taking advantage of that technology? And then if you look at the defined benefit space, we've got in the pensions bill that's coming a super fund authorization regime. You've got just under 5,000 defined benefit schemes. 2,000 of those have got less than 100 members. So, and that's also true of the DC landscape. You have got a few very large schemes and then a plethora of much smaller schemes. So I think when we're talking about investing in technology, we've got to recognize there are some enormous schemes that have the resources, the financial strength to invest in technology. They have the people, as Johnny was saying, to roll it out and take advantage of it. But there are a lot of really small schemes of, is it the right thing to invest in technology? Is it right to choose an administrator that's using that technology? Or do you actually just merge into another entity? So I think that is the shape of the landscape sort of doesn't help, and the varying size, and then it is into well, actually, if it is worthwhile investing, how do you do it? What standards do you want to achieve? And so I think, as Johnny was saying previously, it's PASA's role to identify a common benchmark, a common standard, and encourage people to do that, and then to try and raise those standards over time. But I think particularly with technology, there is an awareness issue of what the art of the possible is, and actually, is it affordable, and who's it affordable for? So I think there's an enormous amount of information that PASA can collate and then disseminate to its members. But I think we've got to be aware that the regulator is focusing very much on administrators. The administrator landscape, I think, is really interesting. There are 14 administrators that cover 75% of scheme memberships, 47 administrators that cover 90%. And that consolidation in the market is going to change the administration market. And the regulator is looking at a close eye. It's looking at all 47 of those administrators that cover 90% of membership, and is examining what they do. It's examining their systems, their governance, their profitability. So we need to help educate the regulator of what's important and what it should be looking at. We've got to help our members understand why the regulator is interested in this market. And ultimately, we might get to a position where the regulator thinks there should be an authorization regime for administrators, or some kind of accreditation to raise that standard. And I think PASA has a great opportunity to actually influence that and say, actually, you don't need to impose legislation and regulation, because actually the members of PASA have reached a standard which actually is acceptable and is doing the right thing as far as the regulator is concerned.
I think a really good example of where PASA has led the way in those sort of things is in the area of dashboards. Is taking that information and making it digestible and understandable in a common way. And I think that's where PASA is really comes into its own, because we've got people from all around the industry who are putting their own time and effort into making this work because they care passionately about it. And it needs to be that, it will be the same with digital administration. It's helping the rest of the industry get to a level that is good for the people we serve, which is the end member of the pension schemes. And it's that what I really enjoy about the working groups is that each individual that comes along to the working groups for PASA that produces the guidelines and standards, they all bring their own ideas, their own knowledge, their own expertise, but they bring it very much voluntarily and without that commercial bias. They come to raise on behalf of the industry rather than from a commercial perspective, which I think is admirable for everybody concerned, but also a huge source of benefit to the industry as a whole.
No, indeed. The Digital Admin Working Group, one of PASA's working groups, what role do you think that group can play in terms of pushing the digital agenda forward?
I think there's been a lot of work done by that group so far over the last few years, looking at suggestions and giving some good examples. I think most of that group now are looking to suggest action. and actually making things happen. What is it? How does that change come about? And I think that's going to be the really exciting piece is for those firms and for those schemes and for those TPAs, etc., who perhaps not out of the starting blocks or perhaps want to learn a little bit more about how you go about that. I think that's an opportunity for the working group to pick that up.
Yeah.
And I know you're now the chair of the working group. So what are your aims over the next 12 months for sort of steering that?
So I think for me, it is really defining what good looks like. So even going down to sort of process by process. So retirements, savings. Really breaking that down and understanding how can being more digital reduce friction, reduce effort both on the member side but also on the scheme administration side. So for me it is around getting into that, defining very specifically what we think good looks like, and therefore administrators can strive toward. And I do think to a certain degree there's been some judgments done around members, scheme members, and how digitally savvy they are. And I think again it's just misconception. So one of our clients introduced online retirements, and there were some naysayers who thought our members are of an age they're not going to log on and want to retire themselves online. The data actually proves the otherwise, that they 60 odd, 70 odd % now of their members are choosing to retire themselves completely online. So I think busting some of those myths as well, I think is really important.